Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. I just recorded a longer episode about Mali and Libya and the Wagner group and their atrocities there. This has been sent to Annette, so that's going to be one of those proper episodes with all the intro music and everything. Nicely edited as well. However, after I finished my yesterday's episode, I discovered that we can call this show Girkin and Pals again. We can call this show Girkin and Pals once again. Yes, because very few things about this war make me happy, and nothing makes me happier when Girkin fails miserably. I was really sad since, at the beginning of October, he went to the front lines and he seemed to be super successful and all this stuff. But he's back. Oh boy, he's back, and it's so much fun. I bet we're going to get some wankering and crazy reports already. But like I said, this is just a short thing, which I'm going to publish out there because I as a Girkin and Pals official podcast, I have to give you updates on my favorite war criminal's situation, because he's obviously avoiding being extracted to Netherlands right now, where he's facing life in prison for his acts of terrorism, because he's a really evil man. Let's not forget that part, right? But he posted a long thing on Telegram just after yesterday's episode, as I had finished recording, and I want to give you it in full. I spent some time translating this, so this is Girkin and stating that how he was about to do war crimes, but how that didn't work out. Quote. It's going to be a bit of a long one, so, prepare for this. Like I said, a longer, proper episode, and all the news are incoming. It's just a little extra for you guys. Quote. I am in Moscow. Attempt number 3 to do war crimes. I mean, to take a direct part in the hostilities against the armed forces of quote unquote respected Kiev partners. And in brackets, they are now referred to in the reports of the Ministry of Defense as some kind of militants, brackets closed, did not end in success, although it was very close to that. Aww, we're sad. Briefly, without details. So, having arrived, as agreed, at the end of the first 10 days of October in the territory of the DPR, on the 14th, I appeared at one of the military commissariats of the Republic, where I wrote a statement asking for voluntary mobilization of myself into the ranks of the DPR armed forces. On the same day, I was enlisted in the marching company, infantry company of the 9th Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 1st Corps of the National Militia of the DPR for subsequent assignment to the 9th Battalion of the 9th Rifle Regiment. I received the corresponding temporary certificate, which he provides. It's funny and it's little and it could be photoshopped, but he provides it. During a number of working trips, I visited Donetsk several times. I was unofficially informed that the inconsistent enrollment in the national militia of the DPR caused dissatisfaction with the, quote, higher command, but they assured me that this issue, quote, would be resolved over time, end quote. But for now, I would have to fulfill my duties formally holding the position of private, which suited me quite well, since the choice between, just sitting out there and doing nothing or just going to the front was already initially made in favor of going to the front, and I was not going to apply for command positions and related preferences and regalia. Further, after a rather long stay at the military training ground, as the acting chief of staff of the battalion being formed, in November, I left with a group of battalion fighters to the area where the main forces of the N Regiment were located in the area of Svatovo, where I tried to carry out the duties in the beginning for a little more than 10 days. I was trying to do in the battalion headquarters everything I could regarding preparations for our upcoming combat use at the front. The location of the unit was within the range of enemy field artillery fire. However, during my stay, it was never subjected to shelling, although attacks on this point and its environs were repeatedly made easier. After that, I again departed, first to the location of the PPD of the 9th Brigade and then to the training ground. As part of the performance of the duties of the 9th Battalion at the end of November, I found out with some bewilderment, which is just, this is not mistaken, he found out with some bewilderment. I love this. That not only did I not hold a position in my battalion, but I was not at all listed in the States of the Nth Regiment. Trying further to understand my status, I quickly established that I was also long gone from the list of the personnel of the Nth Brigade in the infantry company which I entered upon enrollment. Now, see, okay, I'll get to the comments later. This has to be done to the end. Further informal investigation allowed, in general terms, to establish the following. Shortly after being enrolled in the company, I was transferred to the Nth Regiment, in which I was enrolled for exactly 1 day. In the morning I was listed, in the evening I was taken out without a trace. All these manipulations, probably done under pressure from above, were not formalized by any orders. As a result, from October to the end of November, I was illegally in the Nth Battalion of the Nth Regiment, illegally carried weapons and ammunition, illegally traveled to the area of the combat and to the frontline zone. If something happened to me during these trips, then should I explain that I would be represented exclusively by the quote-unquote amateur activity of the adventurer Girkin? Girkin's an adventurer now. I give him the class of murder hobo in the name of all D&D GMs. Murder hobo Girkin. You gotta love this. Continuing on, this Mali episode and Wagner group episode was really, really dark. I prepare you for that. It's just that this makes my day and makes my inner Kristaps, inner Eastern Border philosopher, podcaster host just brighten up like a bloom in spring when I read about Girkin's massive failures. This is just amazing. Continuing on, or at best by an accident during quote-unquote volunteer activities. With a corresponding complete lack of obligations on the part of armed forces of the Russian Federation, or DPR, and the state in relation to me. The command of the Nth Regiment and Battalion knew about this, but, receiving very solid assistance for their unit, food, equipment, vehicles, funds for fuel, the flow of volunteers, etc., due to my stay in the regiment and the battalion, they preferred not to tell me. The establishment of all these circumstances made my further stay in the Nth Regiment impossible. And since I was in it, as indicated above, it turns out I was not formally involved in any way. I just had to hand over the machine gun, pistol, grenades, and ammunition illegally issued to me, since the battalion is not at the front or even in the frontline zone, and it is not known when it will be there and whether it will turn out to be there at all. Settle pressing issues with undistributed equipment and humanitarian aid, as well as volunteers. Most of them were redirected, together with praporshik, to combat units and subunits with more adequate, responsible, and competent command, and depart where I see fit, which is what I have done. I returned to Moscow late last night, which is just amazing. Now he continues thereon to speak about his impressions about this whole front line, but I do have to throw a bit more stones in the garden of Mr. Girkin right here, because this does look a bit awfully suspicious now, doesn't it? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for our best buddy, best nemesis, murder hobo adventurer Girkin to get into all sorts of weird shenanigans, which I can then relay on my podcast, and hey, I will definitely put the monetize button on this one. It doesn't pay much, though, really. I actually heard that at one point I was advertising some Saudi Arabian states-funded company. Yeah, I looked in the adverts, that brought me in total $25. I don't know how much ACOS took from it. If you want to support the show, please, Patreon or direct donations are a much better option, but yeah, I'm waiting when I can get a better deal out of them, since when I signed this deal with ACOS years ago, I was but a tiny podcaster with no influence, and they were hosting me for free, but they get to keep the majority of the ad revenue, which is not much back then anyways. Right now, I think that if I would re-sign the deal, I could get a much better one out of them, because if Saudi oil companies want to run ads in my show, I kind of want the big bucks out of them, you know. That would kind of free me off and would allow me not to rely on Patreon so much and make my life easier, because, you know, it also would feel just nicer to just say that stuff has happened, because, again, Lockheed Martin also has advertised on this show, and I didn't see any of that big bucks. It's just a thing. But if you're a private company that wants to advertise, please let me know. I at this point feel zero loyalty to Acast. But the main point here, besides the advertising of my Patreon and how can you make one-time donations here, was the fact that that looks a bit suspicious, doesn't it? Since the only activities that we actually saw from Girkin in all this period were some photos in trenches, one photo in trenches, mind you, one, okay? And it doesn't really look that great. I think it's just as likely as if this was true, and it might be true because it's Russian military in the Ukrainian front, and I've seen weirder things happen, right? But I think it can, sadly, might as well exaggerate. Sorry, my throat's still hurting a bit. Girkin might as well exaggerate his achievements there to just make him look a bit more macho. He is quite an old man, after all, and he might as well just not go anywhere. Just, he could have just sat in his home place and done nothing. Can't deny that, which is a thing that a lot of people have actually stated to me on Twitter. But I do wish to believe him, because adventurer murder hobo Girkin is the best thing ever. And if he actually managed to truly go and fail, that's the best scenario. And after I recorded this whole episode with many takes and many reshoots and actually disturbing, brain-damaging content with many atrocities and horrible stuff happening about the Wagner group, I wish Girkin really had this terrible luck on him. But let's just add to that he might as well be tricking all of us. But then again, he didn't appear in any shows, he wasn't in contact with anyone, and if he would be lying, then, well, I bet his self-proclaimed buddies would be the first ones to, quench him out. But that didn't happen, so I do believe that, he really did go there. However, I will believe that once more, and with a bit more accuracy, when I see him actually publishing kind of one of the longer files of audio or video about what he actually did on the front. However, he also states that, at the end, he mentioned some things that he saw there. Quote, "And now also briefly on the impressions of the trip, which is inconclusive but not useless, since my eyes and ears are mated with me, and my head is also working." You sure about Girkin? You sure about that one? Okay, what? I'll stop making jokes. They are purely here for my mental health and for yours as well, but fine. Quote, "Naturally, I intend to keep the vast majority of my impressions and conclusions to myself, to, so to speak, not to discredit. Positive impressions I will share in the upcoming, hopefully, video conferences, but there are not too many of them in relation to the negative ones. And now I will only note that the basis of all of our quote-unquote increasing victories on the fronts and directions of the special military operation is the deepest crisis of strategic planning. Simply put, the troops are fighting by inertia and not having the slightest idea of the ultimate strategic goals of the current military campaign, and are only guessing about the vague plans of the command for such grandiose, senseless gestures as the construction of a completely insane in uselessness but wildly expensive in terms of execution cost, Surovikin lines. And Surovikin, let me remind you, is the General Armageddon, and the lines are defensive lines. Carrying on. In most parts of the Russian Federation armed forces, soldiers and officers do not understand for what and for what purpose they are fighting in general. For them, a mystery. What is the condition for victory, or just the condition for ending the war? And the authorities of the Russian Federation are not able to explain this to them, since setting a clear goal for the special military operation means limiting room for maneuver. That is, losing the opportunity to declare the goals of the special military operation as achieved at any moment that the Kremlin leaders consider convenient. And then he goes into brackets and explains, "For the 1,001st time I remind you that the passionately desired reconciliation with partners, for which many steps are being taken to this day." The Russian side actually considers that the Kremlin is on purpose taking many steps to do reconciliation with Ukrainians. That does not really align with their war crimes and all this stuff, but whatever. This is what they believe in. Carrying on. Will not happen and is unattainable in principle, but the Kremlin and Staria Square does not want to believe in it. Such sentiments, specifically in the troops, lead to apathy. Apathy, on the other hand, leads to a drop in morale and the fulfillment of the tasks set for show and slip of the sleeves without a real interest in their successful result. So, in the army of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and parts of the armed forces of the LDNR, although there the fighters have much more motivation, apathy prevails. The absence of a clear military political strategy does not allow the military to develop tactics that will contribute to its implementation. In the meantime, on a whim, the Russian Federation armed forces are preparing for a protracted positional war, building long-term structures along the entire front in the style of a la the Mannerheim line. It does not pull off the Maginot line. The fact that following the strategy of a protracted war is suicide for the Russian Federation, and its authorities and elites too, by the way, I wrote that back in 2014. But I said, more than once or twice, from the very beginning of the current campaign. Therefore, watching how the enemy slowly and without encountering any opposition, and the enemy here is obviously Ukraine, implements his own strategic tasks with the complete passivity of the military and political authorities of the Russian Federation, I do not expect anything good at the front in the coming weeks. And yes, the so-called Ukraine, he puts Ukraine in air quotes, will not freeze in winter, will not rebel, and will not fight worse. Vice versa. Its soldiers, who have already believed in their strength as a result of the autumn victories of the armed forces of Ukraine and are fully supported by NATO, will only fight harder and harder against the Muscovites, avenging the hardships that their relatives and friends in the rear are forced to bear because of our missile strikes. And they will be met only by apathetic performance of duty, behind which many fighters and commanders have long been looming the unresolved question: what are we doing here? If Moscow is most concerned with the implementation of grain deals, the unhindered pumping of ammonia through Odessa, and the price ceiling of gas and oil supplied to numerous Western partners. Now, let's admit that Girkin does not really know about how much Western partners actually buy the gas and oil, but he's not an economist. He's a guy that just brought a bit of a joy in my life, and I hope that in yours as well, because, oh boy, when the Wagner Group episode is edited, you'll understand why I was super cheerful throughout this one, despite massive pains in my throat. I had to have some fun. До свидания, товарищи. And remember, happiness is mandatory. And if you can, please, this Witcher maybe deserves a buck or two. I hope so, at least. I'm gonna go to Ukraine back, and it's a bit harsh. Until tomorrow.